So there was a period early last week where we had some new 2020 Democratic primary polls, and Pete Buttigieg was up quite a bit, as high as nearly 12%. And we were wondering, is this going to stick or is it temporary? Did Pete Buttigieg peak last week? We also saw last week in those early last week polls that Bernie Sanders was down at about the same time, all the way down to about 15% nationally, which was Bernie's lowest in months. And we were wondering, is this going to stick? Is this for real? And then we had no new polls for about a week. We now have two new ones, and they appear to be on the same page. And that page is one that says that Mayor Pete's pop to close to 12% nationally was temporary. He's back down several points to an average of 9, polling 8 and 9 in the last two polls from Monmouth and Politico Morning Consult. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders and to a lesser extent, Elizabeth Warren have recovered some of their losses. Bernie climbed from 15 to about 17 over the last week, but the last two polls actually have Bernie at 21 and 22, respectively, putting him in second place nationally ahead of Elizabeth Warren. Warren also gaining a little bit in her recent average, polling in third place in both new polls. And meanwhile, Joe Biden continues to fluctuate between 26 and 30, polling 26 in the Monmouth poll and 30 in the Politico Morning Consult poll. Now, these are national numbers, and they are not hugely surprising. Mayor Pete's pop seemed sort of isolated. It didn't seem likely to sustain. Now, with Kamala Harris removed, we are seeing where her 3 percentage points are sort of being distributed. But it's almost mid-December, which means we have to be looking more and more at those first caucuses and primaries, which are Iowa and New Hampshire, followed by Nevada and South Carolina. So let's do that. And only in some do we have recent polling. In Iowa, Buttigieg was way up last month, but there's a new poll out today which has him back down to third place, no longer leading. That's not surprising. He's down nationally. It makes sense he might be down in Iowa as well. Biden and Bernie are fighting for first place in Iowa. In New Hampshire, we also have a new poll out today. Buttigieg has dropped from 22 to 18, makes sense, but still technically in first place, 18 to 17 over Biden, but certainly within the margin of error. In Nevada, we don't have polling since the first half of November. At that point, Biden was well ahead of both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who were roughly tied for second place, but we need new polling there. And then in South Carolina, again, no new polling since November 17th. Biden was well ahead there, with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie fighting for second place, but a relatively distant second. So right now, we really need some new state polling in some of these early states. We're only about a month and a half from the first votes in Iowa. Pete Buttigieg is no longer ahead there. We're about 2.5 months from our first votes in New Hampshire. Mayor Pete has dropped there and is tied for first place rather than leading. And meanwhile, we've lost Kamala Harris. She's ended her campaign. Tulsi Gabbard is polling 1%. She's actually polling 0% in two recent polls. She's decided to skip the debate later this month. We'll talk about that a little bit later. She hasn't qualified for that debate anyway, but she's skipping it regardless. And we are going to follow the polling. We'll hopefully have some new early state polling for you early next week and more national polls, as we did have a lull there of almost 7 to 10 days or so, and the race has continued to adjust. So now that we've gotten polling out of the way, let's talk about the 6th Democratic debate coming up next week.